Jamie is a new teacher at the Steiner School, but he's not new to teaching or study. Education has been a big part of his life. When I asked Jamie what had motivated him to go back to school, he said, a personal collapse with the recognition that something was missing in terms of education and the way schools prepare young people to function well. So in roughly 6 minutes, there is an opportunity to share a glimmer of the 6 years I have just spent going back to school, a learning journey that involved asking big questions. So his story is called The Teacher Who Went Back to School. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you very much. Just wondering if it's going to rain. So we've got 6 minutes and 6 years to get through. So here we go. The story is obviously it's my story. Started as a school teacher in a local school, and I was given it a good shot. I did a degree, I did my papers, and this is knowledge. And here we go. And I did that for about 6 or 8 years, but as Hans alluded to in the introduction, there had to be a recognition of something, and that was really that I was too lost. Lost in 2 ways, I guess. Lost that I sensed something was missing in education, something about these bells that went every hour, and the drive for the curriculum, and if I was honest with you all, I'd say lost a little bit of myself, because as a 35-year-old man, you know, there was a few masks there and pretenses and trying to be somebody, I think. So what do you do when you're lost? You stand still. And David Wagner's got a beautiful poem about standing still. I'm just going to share a few lines with you because it'll explain the next piece. And he says something like this. He says, stand still. The trees and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it like a powerful stranger. Listen. The forest breathes. It says, I've made this place around you, so if you go, you can come back and say, here. No two bush is the same to robin, no two branch is the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, then you're surely lost. Stand still. And I share the poem because I quit school and went to the Wangapeka Retreat Centre on a 3-year course to stand still. And it's pretty interesting what happens when you stand still and ask the question, you know, what is education? Cut the chatter, cut the phone, cut the friends, cut the knowledge I thought I knew, somebody else's knowledge. And what happened there was interesting, because I remember I did my training, I did it for a couple of years, and then I thought, right, I'm ready. I've seen Star Wars, and I took myself up to the top of the hill, and I did a 6-week solo retreat up there. It went well for the first 10 days. And then it just crumbled, and you know, just about every demon that had been in my life came up, and I couldn't cope really, and I crumbled and I fell apart and I went down the hill, and fortunately there was a friend and a wise person, and I said to him at the time, I said, man, I just, you know, I can't deal with all these demons, they just won't go away. And he said, no, they're not supposed to. You've got to make friends with them. And that really was a big part of understanding what this work was about, and another angle of education. So that was thread 1 really of this going back to school. Part 2 was going to this over the hill to Golden Bay to tracks. So has anyone heard of tracks or tides? Give a little hands. Anyone know what a rite of passage is? Except for Stephen. So this is extraordinary, quite left field. Growing up in the UK, had nothing like this. And what struck me about going to tracks was a couple of things. One, I was totally challenged. It's a bit like this really, to stand up and speak as you are. I noticed other men were taking their masks off too. And we did an initiation, which was new for this from the culture I'd come from. And I don't know what happened at initiation, but I know after it, something had opened. So that was part 1. The retreat, part 2, going to tracks. The third piece in going back to school was having the good fortune to be enrolled in a master's course, a master's in education, which gave me the great challenge of trying to articulate these two big pieces in a language. So, and that's what I try to do. So I'll just share a little bit of that, because what I tried to do was interview the families that had been through Tracks. For those who don't know, let me just go back one step. Tracks offers a community-led rite of passage for fathers and sons. And fathers and sons go with their fathers go with their boys on the 5-day course. Mums are invited too. It's like a whole family approach. They do a separation, transition, and return. So in the research, I interviewed the mums, the young men, and the fathers, and I'll just share a couple of pieces that stuck with me. So the first was the mums, and I remember this one mum talking about the joy she felt. She described it as how her heart leapt when her son, who was being held in this symbolic circle of woman, broke free to go and claim his manhood with the men who had come, and so they basically say, it's time to come with us. And he did it on his own will. She also articulated that her son had found a hunger for truth, which he didn't even know he had, which was, it was really interesting to me. She also talked about how rituals create a way of educating like the whole being, not just these pea-sized brains. And I think that's really significant about this question about what is education, that it's more than just the cortex. And if I get a chance, I'll come back to that. And then there's other stories. There's the young men themselves, and they shared stories like, I remember one young man talking about, it was the first time he'd felt and had a belief of magic in the world. And the way he spoke, and the way he looked at me when he said it, I knew something was going on there. And I remember another boy who found the words to articulate his grief that his father was not in his life anymore. And in the thesis I was like, just speculating, I can't quantify this, but like, what effect did that have for that young man, later on, being able to be held in a way where he could share his story. And the father's stories, they were good, amazing too. One father I recall saying to me, that was the greatest gift of my life, to have my son see me for who I was, rather than see me in the father role. And I remember another father talking about his struggle he had to let go of his son, so that his son could face his initiation. And I think the father was reflecting on how he had all these hopes and fears, and it was time to let him go and let this young man grow up. The last piece I'll share with you was an interview I had with an elder. His name was Chimmy Shaw, and Chimmy was pretty insightful. He said something that is what stays with me and what I'm carrying forward now in my question with education. He said to me, what we need to do is bring intelligence to the core emotions. And what he was trying to explain, I think, was he was saying even, great thinkers like Einstein were emblematic of a paradigm where they thought, if only we can understand how something works, we can end suffering. And he was really opening the perspective, saying, no, there's more to it than just the cortex and how things work. There's a 2 million year old self within a human being. And I think that's what this mother was referring to about the power of rituals. So there you go, there's enough. I don't know what time's been, 6 minutes. There's a few flavours of this journey. Going back to school to find out about education. You might not be surprised I've ended up in a Steiner school, I don't know. But before I go, I'm going to share with you a poem. The poem's by Rilke, and it really embodies the flavour of the work, so let it touch you. And Rilke says, sometimes a man stands up during supper and walks outdoors and keeps walking toward a church that lies somewhere in the east. And it sounds harsh, and his children say blessings on him as if he was dead. Another man stays inside his own house, dies there, inside the glasses and the dishes, so that his children have to go far out into the world toward that same church that he forgot. Thank you very much.